this unit, I'm going to show you the automatic way that Adobe Illustrator allows you to turn any graphic into a pattern. You will not have to manually clone it. Let me show you how to do so. I created in Adobe Illustrator this abstract illustration using my pen tool and the mesh tool that we just showed. And what I would like to do is create a bigger pattern, a bigger image where you don't really see where these illustrations are tiling, but I don't want to manually have to copy and clone all of them. What I will do is select all of those shapes and right click in order to group them. And that is just the way I prefer to work. It's not necessary, but I feel like it's easier when you have your objects as one group to move forward and do any amends on them. Go to Object and then select Pattern and Make. And this is gonna allow me to create out of this composition of shapes a pattern. There is also a quicker way, kind of a shortcut, which is through the Swatches panel. Go to Window and then Swatches, except if you already see on the right hand side your Swatches panel open. What I will do next is just drag and drop my illustration on the Swatches panel. And you will see that automatically it creates a little icon with your pattern, so New Pattern Swatch 1. So instead of having to go through the Object menu, you can just drag and drop it on the swatches and it's gonna create a pattern. I don't really see my pattern because it's a swatch and I didn't apply it to a shape yet. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of this composition. I don't need it anymore. I created already a pattern and I'm gonna draw a rectangle. And you see how it fills up with this pattern. Or if I select any other swatch, of course it's gonna change the color based on the swatch that I select. But if I click on the swatch with the pattern, it's gonna apply the texture of the pattern. And you can see how scaling up your rectangle, it fills the space with more and more pattern. Now, as you can see, the pattern doesn't look as great because there is a gap here between the shapes as well as horizontally, and you can see where the tiles are actually repeating themselves. In order to fix that, we will need to amend our pattern itself. Double click on the swatch of your pattern. And you see that it gave me this pattern options panel. I'm gonna zoom out a bit with Command and minus or Control minus on Windows to see the tiles of the pattern. We have at the center here the main tile, the main graphic that we created, and all over around we have the clones. Of course, I am still able to edit my pattern, so I can still select the shape, rotate it, for example, flip it, or select any kind of anchor point, recolor it, for example. So it's still perfectly editable. What you can also do is arrange the way that these tiles are gonna work together. And this is through the option here of the tile type. So we have the grid, which is what we actually see at the moment, and then you have underneath the brick by row. It creates tiles correspondingly horizontally, but with a bit of distance. And then we have brick by column, hex by column, and hex by row. You can see all those different patterns, how they interact with the shapes and how they work differently. The best was, I think, the hex by column, where the shapes are kind of coming together. There is still a bit of gap, but we are going to work with that. Another thing which is quite important is to name your pattern. So I can always find which pattern is which one and so on. Underneath we have the options of the width and height, which allow you to specify the overall height and width of the tile. You see how the shapes are pushed a bit on the sides. And with this little button next to it, you can specify the proportion, so if you want them to still be length or not. Underneath you have the size tile art. If you select this option, it allows you to cause the size of the tile to shrink to the size of the artwork being used to create the pattern. I'm just gonna enable it. And that is how I usually work with patterns, because this way it allows me to specify the spacing. So I can change the spacing between the shapes horizontally. So you see how it pushes the shapes a bit farther, but they're still nice one on top of the other. You can change also the spacing on the other axis, but I'm gonna go this time minus because I want to reduce the distance, not to increase it as I did before. You can link and unlink the proportions if you want. And you already see how the pattern is working way better than before, having like the tiles being one close to another. It's kind of harder to recognize where we actually clone the shapes. Underneath here we have the overlap option, which allows us to determine which tiles appear in front and which ones at the back. So you see the first icon is left tile is gonna be on top of the other one, or this one, the right tile, is gonna be on top. You see how it changes by clicking on them. And corresponding, like on the vertical axis, how you bring the top or the bottom tile at the front. In this pattern here, since it's quite abstract, it doesn't really make a huge difference. Both ways work, but it might be on a specific pattern that it makes a bigger difference. The copies underneath determine how many rows and columns of tiles are visible while modifying the pattern. For example, I can switch to 5 by 5 and you see that we have extra clones around my pattern. Underneath you have the Dim Copies option, which allows you to make all the copies around having a bit of the opacity. If I disable it, I can see the outcome, so all the tiles together. That is a good thing to click and unclick so you can check how your pattern is going to look like and check also your main tile how it goes. With the option underneath, you can show and hide the tile edge, so select the option to display a box around the tile. The last icon allows you to select this option in order to display a unit portion of the pattern that is repeated to create the pattern, which I usually tend to have it disabled. Now that we are happy with our pattern, you can do two things. One is press done and oversave this amends to your pattern, or what you can also do is click save a copy and it creates a new pattern with the new adjustments. And now it's up to you again if you still want to oversave it or just cancel and have your pattern as it was before. So I'm just gonna cancel in this case. We have our pattern that we had before because I cancelled, so I didn't oversave the new adjustments to the pattern. But I can just select the swatch bubbles to apply it and have the new pattern that we just created by adjusting the spacing and the way that the grid is gonna be applied. All these options are allowing you to edit as much as you like your pattern. And of course, I can double click again and go back and further edit my pattern. And you see also how all the clones are moving at the same time with the original shape that I'm moving. Another thing that you might want to do is add a background to your pattern. So I'm gonna go and create a shape behind it. What you will see here is that this shape is actually overlapping with the shapes of the clones, which makes sense because we have a tile that is not a perfect rectangle. That doesn't really work though, yeah? We are not really happy with this outcome. And another thing that might happen is where the tiles are actually touching one another, you have a little white line, so there is a little gap between the two tiles. In general, I would suggest do not include a background color to your pattern. So I'm gonna go to edit and cut these shapes. Press done in order to apply it. I would suggest instead to bring in your background after you apply the pattern to a shape on a different shape that you place right behind your pattern. And that is the best possible way in order to have a background with no issues of overlapping with the shapes or leaving a gap and so on. Adobe Illustrator allows you to quickly and easily create patterns using simple graphics or bigger compositions. Drag and drop your graphics to the swatches panel to turn them to a pattern. You can edit them further if you want to, and don't forget to apply them to a shape in order to see the final outcome. In the next unit, I'm going to show you how to transform your patterns.